My name is Layla, and I was born in a quiet suburban town to my wonderful parents, Logan and Madison. My father worked for a local news channel, while my mother cleaned at the hospital. Though we weren't wealthy, our home was filled with love and contentment. Life moved along smoothly until I turned 14, when everything shifted in an instant. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when my parents were out at a dinner party, leaving me at home with my grandmother. I was lost in a cartoon when the phone rang, its shrill tone piercing the air. I'll never forget the cold shiver that ran through me as I heard my grandmother sobbing quietly in the kitchen. In the days that followed, confusion and sorrow blurred everything. My mother had died instantly in a car accident, and although my father survived, he was gravely injured, his legs permanently impaired. As he lay frail and broken in the hospital, my father whispered apologies, his voice thick with emotion. As a child, I couldn't understand his guilt. It wasn't his fault. An irresponsible drunk driver was to blame. But as I grew older, I came to realize that his apologies were not for the accident itself, but for the hardships we would now face and the profound changes in our lives. Still, my father's spirit was unbreakable. Once home and adjusting to life in a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work as a search marketing specialist for the city's major newspaper. His writing abilities remained as sharp as ever, unaffected by his physical limitations. As a teenager, I found strength in our close bond. We shared a love for classic films and lively debates over literature. He supported me through my academic challenges, and when it was time to head to college, he encouraged me to embrace new experiences at State University, where I chose to study forensic accounting. It was there I met Lucy, who quickly became my best friend. Through her, I met her second cousin, Aiden. He was compassionate and quick-witted with a sharp mind that matched my own. He accepted my family's situation without hesitation, and when he met my father, they bonded instantly over their mutual love of classic rock. Aiden's respect for how I managed my life and responsibilities filled me with quiet pride. College passed in a blur, and after graduation, life began to settle into place. I landed a job as a tax manager, while Aiden became a commercial driver. Our relationship flourished, and 4 years later, Aiden proposed in the same park where we had shared our first date. Beneath the canopy of autumn leaves, I said yes with one important condition, that I could not leave my father, who still needed my care. Aiden, with a reassuring smile, accepted without hesitation, sealing our future with love and understanding. In sharing this story, it's clear that life's unpredictability can tear apart everything we know, but it can also stitch things back together in surprising, beautiful ways. Our current arrangement may have been unconventional, but I wouldn't change it for anything. We all live together quite comfortably now. My father's apartment is spacious enough for the 5 of us. Our wedding was intimate and beautiful. Despite being in a wheelchair, Dad insisted on rolling down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as I held Aiden's hand, feeling like I was living in a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its challenges, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Natalie, and my sister-in-law, Ruby. From the start, it was clear they disapproved of me. During our first meeting, Natalie had asked, her face twisting in distaste, "So, your father is handicapped?" I corrected her calmly. "He's disabled, but he works as a search marketing specialist." "Oh," she said dismissively, clearly uninterested. "How nice." Her indifference stunned, but it wasn't as hurtful as when she later turned to Aiden and asked, "Are you sure about this? There are plenty of nice girls from reputable families." I felt a rush of indignation, but Aiden immediately stepped in. "Mom, Layla comes from a fine family too. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." His words quieted Natalie for the moment, but I could see her disapproval still lingering in her eyes. Ruby, following her mother's lead, was just as distant. After the wedding, Aiden moved in with Dad and me. We settled into a comfortable routine. I worked at the tax office, and Aiden spent days on the road. When he was home, we enjoyed meals together, but whenever Natalie and Ruby visited, the atmosphere in our home shifted. They paraded around as if they owned the place, barely acknowledging my father. Once I overheard Natalie whisper to Ruby, "It's such a pity Aiden ended up with her and her crippled father. What if they have kids? Can you imagine the genes?" I was livid, but I stayed silent for Aiden's sake. I tried to keep the peace, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. One evening, after another tense visit from Natalie and Ruby, I couldn't hold back my tears. Aiden found me crying in our bedroom. Hey, he comforted me, pulling me close. "What's wrong?" I managed to say through my sobs. Your mom and sister, they despise me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad. Aiden's expression hardened. That's absurd. You and Dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours. His words reassured me, but the tension with Natalie and Ruby remained. Over time, Aiden's trucking business thrived, and he was frequently on the road. I missed him during his absences, but I kept busy with work and spent my evenings with Dad. Then, one crisp autumn night, as I helped Dad into bed, Aiden called, his voice full of excitement. Lee, I've been thinking, he began. How would you feel about us buying a townhouse? It would be more accessible for Dad in his wheelchair. He could spend more time outdoors, and you could even have a garden to tend to. The more Aiden spoke about the idea, the more intrigued I became. I glanced at my dad, who was trying not to show he'd been eavesdropping on the conversation. What do you think, Dad? I asked, switching the phone to speaker mode. His eyes sparkled with excitement. A garden sounds wonderful, he confessed, a smile breaking across his face. And it would make getting outside so much easier. That was the deciding moment. Over the next several weeks, Aiden and I dedicated ourselves to finding a new home. Eventually, we discovered the ideal place. A spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a wheelchair-accessible shower for Dad, and a lovely backyard. Although taking out a mortgage was daunting, our combined incomes and the rent from Dad's previous apartment made it possible. We moved in on a sunny Saturday in spring, and I'll always remember the joy on Dad's face as he wheeled out onto our new patio. This is perfect, sweetie, he beamed, his eyes gleaming with gratitude. In the months that followed, we settled in comfortably. I started a small vegetable garden, and Dad spent hours outside, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. Life felt blissful. Then came our housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, Natalie and Ruby. They arrived late as usual and immediately surveyed everything with barely hidden envy. During the house tour, Natalie's calculating glances became obvious. When we reached the master bedroom, she leaned in with a sly grin. You know, Layla, she whispered, this room would be perfect for Aiden and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here. I was stunned. Excuse me, I managed to say, but she continued, undeterred. Your father isn't well. He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be enough for him. Before I could respond, she strolled out to the patio, where Dad was chatting with guests. To my horror, she grabbed his wheelchair and began pushing him toward the driveway. Natalie, I shouted, running after her. What are you doing? If you want him outside, he can stay right here. I was furious and shaken. Thankfully, Aiden heard the commotion and came running, his face flushed with anger. Mom, he shouted, his tone sharp. What are you doing? Let go of Logan's chair now. Natalie looked taken aback by his sternness. But honey, I don't want to hear it. Aiden cut her off. You and Ruby need to leave. Now, after they left, Aiden apologized deeply to both Dad and me. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea she'd go this far. Dad reached out, patting Aiden's hand gently. It's not your fault, son. Some people just don't understand what's important. Life gradually found a new rhythm after the housewarming debacle. Natalie and Ruby kept their distance, which was fine by me. Aiden threw himself into his work, taking on longer hauls to help us manage our new mortgage commitments. It was a challenging time, but it ultimately brought us closer as a family, fortified by resilience and understanding. Balancing my role at the tax office with caring for our home and Dad, the years passed seamlessly. Though Aiden was frequently away, his presence at home always brought us joy. My father's health remained stable, and he enjoyed his days gardening or editing from his workspace at home. Then, one fateful day at work, my phone rang. A chill ran through me as the caller introduced himself as Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol. His words washed over me like cold water as he delivered the heart-wrenching news of Aiden's severe accident. The details of the head-on collision blurred together, the gravity of his words not fully hitting until after the call ended. When reality finally set in, I was left with an emptiness I'd never known. Aiden was no longer with us. The following week passed in a haze of grief and arrangements, carried out in a numb state as I struggled to process the weight of the loss. I knew it was crucial to personally inform Natalie, Aiden's mother, about the tragedy. When I called, her initial sharp tone quickly twisted into harsh accusations, blaming me for Aiden's accident. She claimed his demanding work schedule was my fault, her words leaving me stunned and devastated. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me in tears. Aiden's funeral took place on a gray, drizzly day that mirrored the somber mood. Though his mother and sister were notably absent, the community's heartfelt turnout showed how respected and loved he was. My father stood beside me, offering quiet strength as we braved the sadness together. When we returned home, something felt off. The lights were on, and I could hear movement inside. A bizarre sight, especially since I had double-checked that everything was off before leaving. Fearing a break-in on this already heavy day, I cautiously approached with my father. But as we stepped inside, the voices sounded strangely familiar, revealing a shocking twist. In the living room, I found Natalie and Ruby, surrounded by boxes and scattered furniture. "What on earth is going on?" I asked, confusion briefly breaking through my sorrow. Natalie looked up, her expression a mockery of sympathy. "Oh, Leila, dear," she said smoothly, "we're just helping you pack. After all, you can't afford to stay here now that Aiden's gone." I was too stunned to respond at first. Ruby chimed in with a saccharine smile. "Don't worry, you can move back into your dad's apartment. It's nice and cozy." A surge of anger rose within me. "Get out," I said quietly but firmly, holding back the flood of emotions. "Get out of my house, now." Natalie looked genuinely surprised. "This house is ours now, along with all of Aiden's things. We're his family, after all." I held her gaze, defiant. "Funny, you didn't seem like family today at his funeral." "Oh, that's right, you were there." Natalie waved my words away dismissively. "We had other things to take care of. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We need this cleared out by tomorrow." The audacity left me speechless for a moment. They hadn't warned him, hadn't even shown up to honor him, yet they felt entitled to everything we built together. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone. Natalie and Ruby exchanged a glance, clearly unprepared for resistance. "Leila," Natalie began, but I cut her off. "You have 5 minutes to leave before I call the cops. This is my home. Aiden and I bought it together, and you have no right to be here." My voice was unwavering, and something in my tone must have struck a nerve as they slowly gathered their belongings. Still, Natalie couldn't resist a final threat as they left. "This isn't over, Leila. Expect a call from our lawyers." The following days were a whirlwind of grief, anxiety, and endless paperwork as I began sorting through Aiden's affairs, wary of Natalie and Ruby's next move. About a week later, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered, fearing it was the beginning of Natalie's legal threats. "Mrs. Aiden," a professional voice asked. "This is Anthony from Anthony and Partners. I'm calling regarding your late husband's will." "A will?" I whispered, taken aback. Aiden had never mentioned a will. "Yes, he came to us 4 months ago," Mr. Anthony continued. "He was very clear about his intentions." The next morning, I sat across from Mr. Anthony, anxiously waiting to learn the details of Aiden's will. He offered me his condolences and then opened the file. "As I mentioned, your husband drafted a will," he said, and began to read. "I, Aiden, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Leila." I gasped, tears filling my eyes. Mr. Anthony continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Leila use these resources to care for herself and her father, Logan, whom I have come to love as my own. Even in death, Aiden was protecting us." Mr. Anthony handed me a letter from Aiden, and with trembling hands, I opened it. "My dearest Leila, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Logan. Please know that you two were the best things that ever happened to me. I drafted this will because I knew the nature of my mother and sister, and I didn't want you to worry. I had to ensure that you and Logan would be safeguarded in case something happened to me. You and Logan are my true family, not them. Take good care of each other, live fully, and remember, I'll always be looking out for you. With all my love, Aiden." I held the letter tightly, my tears flowing freely. My father, by my side, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, tears in his eyes as well. Mr. Anthony allowed us a moment to compose ourselves. Then he informed us that, because of the accident, Aiden's insurance would pay out the full value of his policy. "What does that mean?" I asked, still choked up. Mr. Anthony gave a gentle smile. "It means you'll receive enough money to clear your mortgage and more." As we left the office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Aiden had indeed taken care of everything. But as we arrived home, I spotted a familiar car nearby, Natalie's sleek sedan. My heart sank. Natalie and Ruby were on our porch, but this time I felt fortified with Aiden's letter in my pocket and his love giving me strength. Layla, Natalie started, her tone overly sweet. We need to talk about Aiden's estate. I stood firm. No, Natalie, we really don't. Aiden left everything to me. It's all legal, and you know why? Because we were his family, not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing. Natalie was momentarily speechless, and Ruby, looking uneasy, quickly tugged at her arm, urging her to retreat. They left, but I knew they wouldn't give up so easily. In the following weeks, I managed Aiden's affairs, and as promised, the insurance money arrived. It was enough to pay off our mortgage with a bit extra. One afternoon, while sorting through Aiden's things, I discovered a journal in his desk. Inside were his handwritten plans and dreams, including starting a college fund for the children we hoped to have. Reading his words, I felt a deep ache for the future we had planned together. That night, I struggled to sleep, haunted by what might have been. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Aiden, smiling and reassuring me that everything would be okay. I awoke with a strange sense of peace, but the following days brought a new, persistent queasiness. At first, I thought it was stress. But soon, a nagging thought crept in. After a week of wondering, I went to the pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test, my hands shaking as I waited for the result. When I finally looked, 2 distinct blue lines confirmed my suspicion. Overwhelmed, I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, a storm of joy, fear, grief, and hope washing over me. My dad knocked, his voice concerned. Layla, everything okay in there? I opened the door, tears streaming down my cheeks, and held up the test. I'm pregnant, Dad. He pulled me into a tight embrace, comforting me with the same tenderness he had shown me when I was a child. It's okay, he soothed. You're not alone in this. This baby is a blessing, a part of Aiden that will live on. His words resonated deeply. This child was not only a continuation of my love with Aiden, but also a symbol of new beginnings. My fears started to dissolve, replaced by a newfound strength. You're right, I said, wiping away my tears. This baby is a blessing and will be just fine. Dad smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling with affection. That's my girl. Now, let's get something to eat. You're eating for 2 now. As we went to the kitchen, I felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Dad became my rock, constantly encouraging me as we prepared for the baby's arrival. One sunny afternoon, while I was tending the garden we had built together, a familiar car pulled up, breaking the peaceful moment. It was Natalie and Ruby. They approached the porch with expressions of discomfort and desperation. Layla, Natalie began, her sharp tone now softened by circumstance. We need to talk. We've hit some hard times. Could we possibly stay in your dad's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet? Their audacity stunned me, but I remained calm. I'm sorry, but that's not possible, I said firmly. I don't wish to maintain contact with either of you anymore. Natalie's gaze dropped to my belly, her face twisting with disdain. You're pregnant already, you little? Her words dripped with venom, but I stayed composed, refusing to let her affect me. My personal life is none of your business, I replied calmly. Natalie, realizing she was defeated, huffed in frustration before turning on her heel, pulling Ruby along. As they left, a profound peace washed over me. I had defended my family and upheld my dignity, and I knew, without a doubt, that Aiden would have been proud.